The breaking point. The massive observation windows of Station Harmony stretched across the entire western wall, offering a breathtaking view of the Andromeda Nebula. The station floated in neutral space, deliberately positioned between 12 different star systems to serve as the galaxy's primary diplomatic hub. Inside the Grand Negotiation Hall, representatives from the 7 most powerful civilizations in the known galaxy gathered around an enormous circular table made of crystallized starlight. The table itself was a marvel of engineering, glowing softly with captured photons from a dozen different suns. Ambassador Marcus Chen walked slowly toward his designated seat, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous chamber. He was 52 years old, though the weight of the past 8 years had added lines to his face that made him appear older. His dark suit was impeccably tailored, a stark contrast to the elaborate robes and biological modifications worn by the alien delegates surrounding him. Behind him walked 3 other human representatives, each carrying data tablets and diplomatic credentials that had taken years to earn. Marcus had been coming to these negotiations for 8 long years. 8 years of sitting at this table, presenting humanity's case for equal representation in the Galactic Council. 8 years of carefully worded proposals, economic analyses, and demonstrations of human capability. 8 years of being treated like an enthusiastic child asking to sit at the adult table. The memory of his first day here remained vivid in his mind.
He had arrived full of hope, believing that reason and evidence would be enough to earn humanity's place among the great civilizations.
How naive he had been. The Velkari representative, a being named Silthar, occupied the seat of highest honor. His species had evolved on a high-gravity world, giving them thick, muscular bodies covered in plates of natural armor that resembled polished obsidian. 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on his face tracked Marcus's approach with barely concealed contempt. Beside Silthar sat the Luminari delegate, a creature of pure energy contained within a sophisticated containment field. The field shimmered with colors that human eyes could barely process, shifting between frequencies of light that spoke of emotions humans had no names for. To the left were the Zhen, insectoid beings whose chitinous exoskeletons clicked and scraped as they communicated through pheromones and subsonic vibrations. Their translator devices rendered their communications into standard galactic speech, but something was always lost in translation. The Aquari representative floated in a specialized tank of ammonia-based liquid, her tentacles occasionally pressing against the transparent walls as she observed the proceedings. 2 more races completed the council: the silicon-based Krethar, who resembled living mountains of crystal, and the Cylon, beings of such advanced mental capacity that they rarely deigned to speak, communicating instead through telepathic impressions that lesser species experienced as vague feelings of superiority. Marcus took his seat, placing his personal data tablet on the table before him. The device contained 8 years of accumulated evidence, proposals that had been rejected without serious consideration, promises that had been broken, and treaties that had been violated by the Council with impunity. His assistant, Dr. Sarah Williams, sat to his right. She was 38, brilliant, and possessed a memory that could recall every slight, every dismissive comment, every condescending gesture the Council had made toward humanity over the years. To his left sat Commander James Rodriguez, military liaison and tactical advisor, whose calm demeanor hid a mind constantly analyzing threats and opportunities. The 4th member of their delegation, Ambassador Li Wei, took her position slightly behind Marcus, ready to provide support and documentation as needed. The session began with the customary formal greetings, each species performing their traditional acknowledgement rituals. When it came to the humans, Marcus simply nodded respectfully, knowing that any more elaborate gesture would be seen as pretentious mimicry by these ancient civilizations. Silthar's deep voice resonated through the chamber's acoustic enhancement system, addressing the assembled delegates with the practiced ease of someone who had chaired these sessions for decades. The agenda for today's session appeared on holographic displays above the table. 17 items were listed for discussion, ranging from trade route adjustments to military coordination against pirate threats in the outer territories. Nowhere on the agenda was the matter of humanity's petition for council membership. This was not surprising. In 8 years, the petition had appeared on the agenda exactly 3 times, and each time it had been tabled for future consideration. After only the briefest discussion, Marcus, listened as the council debated the first several items with careful attention to diplomatic protocol and mutual benefit. When the Velkari needed support for expanded mining operations in disputed territory, the Luminari offered assistance in exchange for energy crystals. When the Gen complained about increased pirate activity near their colonies, the Aquari pledged ships to joint patrol efforts. The Council functioned smoothly when addressing matters between established members, each civilization giving and taking in the ancient dance of galactic politics. 3 hours into the session, during a discussion about tariff regulations on agricultural imports, Marcus's data tablet chimed softly. He glanced down at the screen and felt his blood turn to ice. Dr. Williams had been running a passive monitoring protocol on Council communications, something the humans had quietly implemented 2 years ago after discovering their private conversations were being recorded. The tablet showed an intercept of an encrypted communication between Silthar and the Gen representative. The encryption was sophisticated, but human computer technology had advanced considerably in recent years, driven by necessity and the knowledge that they operated in a hostile environment. The decoded message was brief and devastating. It outlined a proposal designated as Operation Harvest, a plan to systematically seize control of 4 key human colonies in the Tau Ceti system under the legal pretense of protecting them from pirate threats. The plan detailed how Council forces would occupy the colonies, strip them of their valuable mineral resources, and establish permanent Council authority over the territories. The justification would be that humanity had proven unable to adequately defend its own settlements, therefore requiring Council intervention for the greater good of galactic stability. Marcus felt a cold rage building in his chest, the kind of anger that came not from a sudden provocation, but from years of accumulated insults finally reaching a breaking point. He looked at Dr. Williams, who nodded almost imperceptibly. She had seen it too. Commander Rodriguez's jaw tightened, the only outward sign of his reaction. Ambassador Li Wei's face remained perfectly composed, but her fingers moved swiftly across her own tablet, no doubt sending urgent communications back to Earth. Silthar was speaking about the importance of maintaining established trade protocols when Marcus stood up. The movement was sudden enough to interrupt the Velkari mid-sentence. All eyes in the chamber turned toward the human ambassador. The Luminari's containment field flickered with what might have been curiosity or annoyance. The Gen's translator devices hummed as they processed the unexpected disruption. Marcus placed both hands on the table, his voice calm, but carrying clearly through the enhanced acoustics of the chamber. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind countless times over the past few years, never quite believing he would actually go through with it. But seeing that intercepted message, seeing the casual contempt with which the Council planned to betray the trust of an entire species, had crystallized his resolve. He began by thanking the Council for their time and patience over the years, his words dripping with a sarcasm so subtle that some of the alien delegates might have missed it entirely. He reviewed humanity's contributions to galactic civilization over the past 2 decades since first contact. Human ships had assisted in evacuation efforts during the Krethar crystal plague. Human engineers had developed breakthrough technologies in faster-than-light communication that the Council now used daily. Human agricultural techniques had helped feed colonies on 3 different worlds during a severe food shortage crisis. Human peacekeepers had died defending Council trade routes against raider attacks. And in return, Marcus continued, his voice growing harder, humanity had been granted provisional status as a client species under Council protection. Not membership, not equality, protection, as if humans were children incapable of managing their own affairs. For 8 years, humanity had petitioned for full Council representation. For 8 years, those petitions had been politely declined or indefinitely postponed. And now, Marcus said, holding up his data tablet so the display was visible to all, now he had discovered exactly what the Council thought of their human partners. He transmitted the decoded Operation Harvest documents to the main holographic display system. The communication protocols resisted for a moment, then yielded to the sophisticated override codes that human technicians had embedded in the station systems months ago. The secret plans appeared in the air above the table for all to see, written in standard galactic script with the official seals of both the Velkari and Gen representatives clearly visible. The chamber erupted in chaos. Silthar roared in anger, Demanding to know how humans had accessed encrypted council communications, the Gen representative's translator emitted a series of aggressive chirps and clicks. The luminary's containment field flashed through angry reds and oranges. But Marcus also noticed something else. The Aquari delegate had withdrawn her tentacles from the walls of her tank, a sign of distress or perhaps shame. The Krethar's crystalline structure had dimmed slightly. Even the normally aloof Cylon seemed to be radiating confusion and concern. Marcus waited for the initial outburst to subside before speaking again. He acknowledged that accessing encrypted communications was a violation of diplomatic protocol. He also noted that planning to invade and occupy the territory of a species you claim to protect was a rather more serious violation. He pointed out that the Tau Ceti colonies were home to over 4 million human beings, men and women and children who had built lives on those worlds, who had invested their hopes and futures in building a place for humanity among the stars. Dr. Williams stood beside him and began presenting additional evidence. Over the past 3 years, she explained, humans had noticed patterns in council behavior. Resources requisitioned from human worlds at below-market rates. Technologies developed by human researchers mysteriously appearing in council patents months later. Human trade vessels being delayed by unnecessary inspections, while council ships passed through checkpoints without scrutiny. Individually, these incidents could be explained as bureaucratic inefficiency or miscommunication. Collectively, they painted a picture of systematic exploitation. Commander Rodriguez added military intelligence to the presentation. Human surveillance satellites, far more sophisticated than the Council realized, had been monitoring fleet movements near human territory. What the Council believed were covert observation missions had been detected and tracked. Ships that were supposed to be on anti-piracy patrols had spent suspicious amounts of time mapping human colony defenses and noting the locations of military installations. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. Silthar attempted to regain control of the session, his voice thundering through the chamber as he demanded order and accused humans of gross violations of diplomatic trust. But his words rang hollow in the face of the documented proof of council deception. The other delegates were beginning to argue among themselves, some defending the planned operation as a necessary precaution, others expressing concern that such plans had been made without full council consultation. Marcus let the argument continue for several minutes, watching as the carefully maintained facade of council unity began to crack. Then he raised his hand for silence. When the chamber had quieted enough for him to be heard, he made his announcement. Effective immediately, humanity was withdrawing from all treaties and agreements with the Galactic Council. All human diplomats would be recalled from Council territories within 48 hours. All Council personnel were required to leave human space within 1 week. Trade agreements were cancelled. Military cooperation pacts were void. Humanity would chart its own course among the stars, free from Council supervision and no longer bound by Council laws. The reaction was explosive. Silthar declared that humanity had no legal right to unilaterally withdraw from agreements that had been ratified by proper authorities. The Gen representative warned that such action would leave humanity vulnerable to threats they could not possibly handle alone. The luminary suggested that humans were being emotional and irrational, acting on wounded pride rather than logical assessment of their position. Only the Aquari remained silent, her tentacles pressed against her tank in what might have been resignation or sorrow. Marcus responded to each objection with calm precision. The treaties humanity was withdrawing from were agreements between unequal parties, signed under circumstances where humans had little choice but to accept whatever terms were offered. Those treaties explicitly included provisions for withdrawal with proper notice, which humanity was now providing. As for vulnerability, Marcus said with a slight smile, perhaps the Council should not assume they fully understood human capabilities. Humanity had learned much in 8 years of careful observation and quiet preparation. Dr. Williams transmitted a final data package to the Council systems. It contained technical specifications for human military vessels that were considerably more advanced than what had been shown to Council observers. It included economic analyses demonstrating that human colonies were now self-sufficient and no longer dependent on Council support. It showed population growth rates and industrial capacity figures that suggested humanity's expansion into space had been far more successful than the Council realized. In short, it proved that humanity had been preparing for this moment for years, building capability while pretending to be weaker than they actually were. The 4 human delegates gathered their materials and walked toward the chamber exit with measured dignity. Behind them, the council representatives called out warnings and threats and demands for reconsideration. Marcus did not look back. As they passed through the massive doors that led out of the grand negotiation hall, he heard Silthar's voice echoing through the chamber, ordering an emergency session to discuss the crisis and determine appropriate responses. In the corridor outside, Ambassador Li Wei allowed herself a small smile. Commander Rodriguez was already on his communicator, issuing coded instructions to human forces throughout known space. Dr. Williams walked beside Marcus, her expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. They had just severed humanity's ties with the most powerful political entity in the galaxy. The consequences would be severe and far-reaching, but they had done so from a position of strength, on their own terms, with their dignity intact. Marcus took a moment to look back through the transparent doors at the chaos still unfolding in the negotiation chamber. For 8 years he had sat in that room enduring condescension and disrespect, swallowing anger and maintaining diplomatic composure. No longer. Humanity had announced to the galaxy that it would be treated as an equal or not at all. Now came the hard part, proving they could back up that declaration with action. As they walked toward the docking bay where their shuttle waited, Marcus activated his secure comlink to Earth. A single phrase would initiate protocols that had been years in development, plans within plans that would reshape humanity's place in the cosmos. He spoke clearly into the communicator. Protocol independence is active. Humanity stands alone. The Awakening. The council chamber on Station Harmony remained in turmoil for 3 hours after the human delegation departed. Silthar had called for order repeatedly, his deep voice growing hoarse from the effort of trying to control the chaotic arguments erupting between council members. The Gen representative blamed the Velkari for allowing the security breach that had exposed Operation Harvest. The luminary accused both species of reckless planning that had jeopardized council unity. The Krathar, normally silent observers, expressed concern through subsonic vibrations that rattled the crystalline table. Only the Cylon remained eerily calm, their telepathic presence in the room suggesting they had anticipated this outcome. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of accusations and recriminations, Silthar managed to restore enough order to adjourn the session. He declared an emergency recess and scheduled a private council meeting for the following morning. As the delegates dispersed to their quarters, most were already composing messages to their respective governments, explaining the unprecedented crisis that had just unfolded. None of them truly understood yet what they had lost. That realization would come in stages over the following weeks, each revelation more alarming than the last. The first sign appeared within 24 hours. The human transport ship that was scheduled to deliver medical supplies to the Velkari colony on Praxis 7 never arrived. The colony administrator contacted Station Harmony to inquire about the delay, assuming it was a simple scheduling error. When informed that humanity had withdrawn from all council agreements, the administrator laughed, thinking it was some kind of diplomatic jest. The laughter died when he realized the message was serious. Praxis 7 had been suffering from an outbreak of crimson fever, a disease that affected multiple species. Human pharmaceutical companies had developed the most effective treatment, and the colony depended on regular shipments to keep the illness under control. Within 3 days, 17 more scheduled deliveries had failed to materialize. Human cargo vessels that had reliably transported goods throughout council space for years simply stopped appearing at their designated destinations. Mining equipment destined for Krethar crystal operations, agricultural supplements for aquari farming colonies, energy converters for luminary installations. All of it vanished as human ships recalled to their own territories. Council administrators initially treated each incident as an isolated problem, attempting to contact the specific companies or vessels involved. They received no responses. Human communication channels had gone dark. On the 5th day after the withdrawal, a Gen trade coordinator named Clixistar was reviewing shipping manifests when he noticed a pattern that made his mandibles click together in distress. He called an emergency meeting with his superiors and presented his findings with increasing agitation. According to his analysis, Human vessels had been handling approximately 40% of all cargo transport within Council space. Not just carrying human goods, but serving as neutral carriers for trade between Council species who preferred not to deal directly with each other due to ancient rivalries or political tensions. The Velkari and Xen, for example, had a history of territorial disputes that made direct trade awkward. Human ships had served as intermediaries, picking up goods from one species and delivering them to the other, providing a convenient buffer that allowed commerce to flow while maintaining diplomatic distance. The same pattern existed between the Luminari and Krethar, whose fundamentally different biology made direct interaction challenging. Human crews, adaptable and diplomatically neutral, had filled crucial gaps in the galactic economy that no one had fully appreciated until they were suddenly absent. Clickstar's report triggered a cascade of similar analyses across Council territories. Economic advisors began calculating the true scope of human involvement in galactic commerce. The numbers were staggering. Over the past 20 years since first contact, humanity had integrated itself into the economic infrastructure of known space far more thoroughly than anyone had realized. They had done it quietly, without fanfare, taking on roles that seemed minor or utilitarian at the time. But those minor roles had accumulated into something significant. Human engineers maintained critical systems on 17 major space stations. Human technicians serviced communication arrays that linked distant Council colonies. Human agricultural specialists advised farming operations on 12 different worlds. Human medical personnel staffed clinics and research facilities throughout Council space, and all of them were now leaving, responding to recall orders that had apparently been prepared well in advance. The evacuation was proceeding with military precision, suggesting this withdrawal had been planned for some time. Commander Trelvas of the Council Security Force was the first to fully grasp the military implications. He had spent years monitoring human fleet movements, dismissing their vessels as primitive and unthreatening compared to Council warships. But as he reviewed the data that Dr. Williams had transmitted during the withdrawal announcement, he felt a cold dread settling into his armored chest. The specifications for human military vessels showed capabilities that should have been impossible for such a young species. Their faster-than-light drives were more efficient than Council standard models, allowing longer range and faster speeds. Their defensive shields utilized a frequency modulation technique that would make them difficult to target with conventional weapons. Their sensor arrays had resolution that matched or exceeded Council military equipment. Most disturbing were the weapon systems, which appeared to be based on principles that Council scientists had theorized about, but never successfully implemented. How had humanity developed such technology? Where had they found the resources and expertise? Trelvas called in his intelligence analyst and demanded answers. What they discovered was humbling. For 20 years, humans had been carefully studying every piece of technology they encountered. They had reverse-engineered Council devices, improved upon them, and then quietly implemented the upgrades in their own systems, while showing the Council only their older, less capable equipment. They had purchased decommissioned Council vessels, supposedly for scrap and study, then used them as templates for their own designs. They had hired alien engineers and scientists as consultants, learning everything those individuals knew while revealing nothing of their own advances. Trelvas called in his intelligence analysts and demanded answers. What they discovered was humbling. For 20 years, humans had been carefully studying every piece of technology they encountered. They had reverse-engineered Council devices, improved upon them, and then quietly implemented the upgrades in their own systems, while showing the Council only their older, less capable equipment. They had purchased decommissioned Council vessels, supposedly for scrap and study, then used them as templates for their own designs. They had hired alien engineers and scientists as consultants, learning everything those individuals knew while revealing nothing of their own advances. Most cleverly, humans had established research facilities in remote areas of their own territory, far from Council observation posts, while Council observers watched and documented the human ships and installations they could see. Assuming that represented the full extent of human capability, the real development was happening in hidden locations. The technical data that Dr. Williams had revealed was clearly only a sample, a warning shot showing just enough to prove humans were not as vulnerable as the Council had assumed. On the 10th day after the withdrawal, Silthar convened another council session. The atmosphere was markedly different from previous meetings. The casual arrogance that had characterized council dealings with humanity had evaporated, replaced by a mixture of concern and frustrated anger. Economic reports from all 7 major civilizations painted a grim picture. Trade routes were disrupted. Supply chains had collapsed. Several colonies were facing shortages of critical materials. The absence of human intermediaries had forced ancient enemies to deal directly with each other, reopening old wounds and creating new tensions. The Aquari delegate, whose name translated roughly as flowing thought through deep waters, spoke with unusual passion. Her species had developed a close working relationship with human oceanographers and aquatic engineers over the years. Human expertise in water-based environments had proven invaluable for Aquari expansion efforts. Now that expertise was gone, and 3 major Aquari colony projects had been suspended indefinitely. She questioned whether the Council's treatment of humanity had been wise, noting that respect and partnership might have served galactic interests better than condescension and control. The Krethar representative, a massive crystalline being called Resonance of Ancient Stone, expressed similar concerns through vibrational communications that translated as deep regret. His species had found human geological knowledge remarkably sophisticated. Human miners had helped the Krethar identify new crystal deposits and develop extraction techniques that minimized environmental damage. The loss of that cooperation would set back Krethar industrial development by years. Even the Cylon, who rarely contributed to council debates, shared a telepathic impression that rippled through the minds of all present. It was a feeling of missed opportunity, of paths not taken, of a future that might have been bright but was now clouded with uncertainty. The Cylon had seen potential in humanity from the beginning, a mental adaptability and creative problem-solving ability that was rare among spacefaring species. They had hoped the Council would nurture that potential as a partner. Instead, the Council had tried to contain it as a threat. Silthar listened to these concerns with growing frustration. His species, the Velkari, prided themselves on strength and dominance. The idea that the Council needed humanity more than humanity needed the Council was deeply offensive to his cultural values. He argued that the current difficulties were temporary, that the Council had survived for thousands of years before humans arrived, and would continue to thrive after they were gone. Alternative arrangements could be made. Other species could fill the roles humans had occupied. The galaxy was vast, and humanity was ultimately insignificant in the grand scheme of galactic civilization. But even as Silthar spoke, reports were arriving that contradicted his confident assertions. A Council military patrol in the Outer Rim had encountered a human defense fleet near the Tau Ceti colonies. The Council ships had approached, intending to assert traditional patrol rights in the region. The human vessels had politely but firmly informed them that Council ships no longer had authority in human-controlled space and requested they withdraw. When the Council commander had attempted to press the issue, the human ships had activated weapons systems and defensive arrays that made the Council vessels look primitive by comparison. The Council patrol had retreated, not wanting to provoke an incident that could escalate into open conflict. But the commander's report was sobering. The human vessels had moved with coordination and precision that suggested extensive training and combat readiness. Their formation tactics were sophisticated, utilizing mutually supporting fields of fire and overlapping defensive coverage. Their communications were encrypted with protocols the Council could not break. These were not the fumbling efforts of a young species playing at military power. These were the actions of a force that knew exactly what it was doing. Similar reports came from other border regions. Human colonies had activated defense networks that had apparently existed for years without Council knowledge. Automated weapon platforms, shield generators, sensor arrays, and patrol craft had suddenly appeared around every major human settlement. The colonies that the Council had assumed were vulnerable and dependent on Council protection were, in fact, heavily fortified and capable of defending themselves. Operation Harvest, the plan to seize control of Tau Ceti, would not have been the easy victory the planners had anticipated. It would have been a bloodbath. The economic situation continued to deteriorate. By the 3rd week after humanity's withdrawal, 16 Council colonies were experiencing serious supply shortages. The Praxis 7 medical crisis had worsened, with crimson fever cases multiplying as treatment supplies ran out. Alternative sources for the medication existed, but transportation was problematic without human carriers. Valkyrie and Zen ships refused to enter each other's territory due to ongoing political tensions. The medicine sat in warehouses while people suffered, victims of ancient rivalries that humans had helped circumvent. Manufacturing centers throughout Council space reported cascading production delays. Components that had been routinely supplied by human factories were no longer available. Attempts to source these materials from other suppliers revealed that in many cases, humans had been the only suppliers, having established near monopolies in certain niche markets. The Council had not noticed because the items involved seemed minor and unimportant individually. But when dozens of minor components were suddenly unavailable simultaneously, entire production chains ground to a halt. The Luminari Energy Collective experienced a crisis when several of their power generation facilities began exhibiting efficiency problems. Human technicians had been maintaining the systems, making small adjustments and modifications that kept everything running smoothly. Without that expertise, the facilities started to drift out of optimal configuration. The Luminari engineers who took over the maintenance discovered that the systems had been significantly modified from their original designs. The humans had made hundreds of small improvements over the years, each one insignificant by itself but collectively transforming the facility's performance. Restoring the original configurations would mean accepting reduced output. Learning to work with the human modifications would take time the Luminari did not have. On the 28th day after the withdrawal, Marcus Chen's face appeared on every communications display throughout Council space. The broadcast was not sent through official channels. It simply appeared overriding normal transmissions, demonstrating once again that human technical capabilities exceeded what the Council had believed possible. Marcus looked calm and professional, seated in what appeared to be a comfortable office somewhere in human territory. Behind him, through a large window, Earth could be seen hanging in space, a beautiful blue sphere that humanity called home. His message was brief and carefully worded. He began by acknowledging that the past 4 weeks had been difficult for everyone, human and alien alike. Humanity took no pleasure in the hardships that Council territories were experiencing. The withdrawal had not been undertaken lightly or with intent to cause suffering. It had been a necessary response to betrayal and disrespect, a declaration that humanity would no longer accept being treated as inferior. He expressed hope that eventually, relations between humanity and Council species could be restored, but on a very different basis than before. Marcus then outlined the conditions under which humanity would be willing to re-engage with the Council. First and most important, humanity must be granted full Council membership with equal voting rights and responsibilities. No more provisional status, no more client species designation, complete equality in all matters of galactic governance. Second, all existing treaties and agreements would be renegotiated from scratch as agreements between equals, with human interests given the same weight and consideration as those of established Council species. Third, the Council must formally apologize for Operation Harvest and provide compensation for the resources that had been extracted from human territories at below-market rates over the past 20 years. The demands were not presented as ultimatums, but as the minimum requirements for rebuilding trust. Marcus emphasized that humanity was willing to be patient. They could wait as long as necessary for the Council to come to terms with the new reality. Human colonies were self-sufficient now. Human trade networks within their own territory were thriving. Humanity had proven it could stand alone if necessary. But Marcus also acknowledged that cooperation benefited everyone. The galaxy was a vast and sometimes dangerous place. Species that worked together as true partners could accomplish far more than species that insisted on hierarchy and dominance. He concluded by offering immediate humanitarian assistance for the medical crisis on Praxis 7. Human ships would deliver the necessary treatments free of charge, as a gesture of goodwill and a reminder that humanity's quarrel was with Council leadership policies, not with ordinary people suffering from disease. The shipment would arrive within 48 hours, and Council forces were requested to allow it to pass unmolested. After that, humanity would wait for the Council's response to the proposed terms.